Michael got into his car, thought for a moment, and picked up the phone. "Hey Max, I need you to cover for me for a week. I need to focus on my new company." Max, his friend, colleague, and partner, agreed without hesitation. They had started their business together, fought for their place in the market, and now they were successful businessmen. 3 years ago, they decided to split their joint company into 2 separate entities. Max took charge of the supply of goods and raw materials, while Michael handled manufacturing. They didn't split because of any quarrels, rather, they wanted to prevent potential conflicts in the future. Each had his own business and company, operating independently, but always ready to help each other. Both were familiar with the entire business process, so if one needed to be away, the other could step in without any issues. Michael had bought a small company in his hometown, not to make a lot of money, but out of nostalgia. The town was small and barely developed, and he knew he couldn't expect significant profits. He didn't have a fantastic business plan, he just wanted to reconnect with his roots. However, he was dismayed by the employees' indifference toward their work. They felt the world was unfair and saw no point in working hard. Michael thought changing the manager would be enough, but realized he had to handle everything himself. He started the car and thought about where he could stay for a week or 2. He didn't want to stay at the local hotel, knowing from past experience that the conditions were terrible. He needed to find a good apartment. As he pulled out of the parking lot, he noticed company employees giving him unfriendly looks. He drove around town, searching for a real estate agency. Eventually, he found one, but despite the sign saying they were open until 5 p.m., the door was locked. It was only 3 p.m. Confused and frustrated, Michael wondered what to do. Driving back to another city for the night and returning in the morning seemed ridiculous. As he drove aimlessly, he found himself in the yard where he had lived 8 years ago. He stopped and saw the building where he had lived, and next to it, the one where Tiffany had lived. Trying to push away old memories, he noticed some elderly women sitting on a bench. To his astonishment, he saw Margaret, the neighborhood menace. She looked much older now, but even 8 years ago, she seemed ancient. Michael got out of the car, feeling her piercing gaze. He approached her, saying, "Hello, Margaret. I'm so glad to see you." She squinted, thinking, and then suddenly smiled. "Michael, is that you?" Astonished, Michael smiled too. "Yes, that's me. I immediately recognized you. Why did you come here? I heard you're a successful businessman now." Michael sat down next to her. Yes, I'm a successful businessman and I always thought I could do anything, but I couldn't find an apartment in this town. It's like the whole town is wiped out." "Why do you need an apartment here, Michael?" "I bought a company in your town. I have to organize everything here, and to do that, I need to stay here for a while. I don't want to go to a hotel. I don't think anything has changed there." "Michael, you don't have to look for a place to live. Stay at my place. I have a 2-bedroom apartment, there's enough space. I don't want to disturb you." "Come on, Michael. I'm sure you'll be at work all the time. Besides, I live alone and I'd really enjoy your company." Michael couldn't believe his luck. He didn't really want to live in this building, but that's fine. No one he knew was here anymore. The most important thing was that Tiffany was not here. She left first, and he left after her when he realized she wasn't joking but really had left him. Margaret said goodbye to her friends and headed home. "Let's go, you can tell me about your life over a cup of tea." After a while, she and Michael sat at the table and Margaret was asking him about the business and his plans. "But why do you need this company? It's been useless for a long time. The same people have been working there for years and they're used to getting paid for nothing. They're lazy, they're not used to making an effort, and you can't change that." Michael replied, "Margaret, times have changed. Nowadays, no one will pay those who don't want to work, and neither will I. If they don't want to work, I'll find other employees, young and promising ones, the ones who need the money." She shook her head. "Well, maybe you're right. Times are really different now." She shook her head in the negative. "Come on, Michael, you don't have to pay me. You bought a lot of groceries and at least I don't feel so bored alone." She didn't even want to listen to his objections and just walked him to his room. "You can stay in this room. The couch is wide and comfortable, and the linens are in the closet. What time are you going to the office in the morning?" "At 7 o'clock. "All right, get some rest." Michael pulled his laptop out of his bag and made his bed. He wanted to work but was tired today and just went to bed. In the morning, the alarm clock woke him at 6 a.m. Michael got up and headed for the bathroom. In the kitchen, Margaret was already cooking something. It smelled like some kind of pastry. He got out of the shower and headed into the kitchen. There were scrambled eggs and puffed pancakes on the table. Michael was very surprised. "Is this for me? I don't eat breakfast in the morning." "That's your biggest mistake. You go to work hungry so you have no energy. You know that breakfast is the most important meal. Try to eat breakfast and your day will go differently." Michael smiled, knowing from his childhood that arguing with Margaret was useless. He thought he wouldn't be able to eat anything, but during his conversation with Margaret, he didn't notice that he ate it all. Margaret smiled as Michael looked at the empty plates with a surprised look. "Oh no, I ate too much. I won't be able to work now for sure." "Oh, you're mistaken, young gentleman. After a good breakfast, you will be able to work as effectively as never before. You'll see." Michael arrived at the office at 7:30. The workday started at 8 o'clock. He pulled the doorknob, but the door was locked. He tried pressing the bell button but got no answer. Strange, he thought. He pays for security guards to be here 24 hours a day. At 10 minutes to 8, the guard arrived. "Excuse me. I believe you're supposed to be here around the clock. After all, I pay for around-the-clock services. But no one comes here at night, so why would I waste my time here?" "But you're paid to be here at night too." "So what? There's no one here at night." Michael realized it was no use talking to the guard. He walked through the open door and entered the office. The human resources, security, and logistics offices were on the first floor. At 8 a.m., no one was in the office. At 8:15, the first employee showed up. By 9 o'clock, almost all the employees had arrived. Michael asked everyone to come to the reception area. The people were nervous. No one expected the new owner to come to the office so early, so there wasn't much of a rush to get to work. They hadn't had any meetings in a while. He's probably going to fire them all, they thought. In fact, that's what he wanted to do, but then he decided to see if anybody could do anything at all. At the meeting, Michael said that everything was going to change, not only the working process but also the payment system. After the meeting, he invited the head of security and the woman from human resources to his office. He told the head of the security department about the incident that morning and warned him that he would no longer tell them how to work but simply change the guards. There was a long conversation with the human resources manager, and he also reviewed each employee's personnel files. He was very active all day, had time to do a lot of things, and thought of Margaret with a smile. It was 4 p.m., and Michael didn't feel any fatigue or hunger. 3 days later, he fired almost half the staff. New people were coming in for interviews, and Michael realized one interesting thing: there were many young and enthusiastic people in this town, but they didn't believe it was possible to live differently. They didn't realize that it's possible to earn a lot if you work hard and make an effort. In the evening, he told Margaret about his insights, and she smiled. "Well, Michael, it's hard to change anyone's mind if they believe in something. That's the nature of human beings." "Well, now I understand that things can change, but what about before?" And then Michael realized that the old lady remembered Tiffany and their love. He got gloomy. Years ago, he didn't seek the truth, he just pointed Tiffany to the door, and she didn't try to tell the truth. She left in silence. Later, Michael tried to talk to her, but it was too late. Tiffany had left this town, and no one knew where she was going. She had deceived him, betrayed him. Her friends had told him she knew all about Tiffany, and it was such a coincidence that Michael felt like an idiot. He arrived home that day, and Tiffany had been living with him for 3 months. He was so happy, but suddenly Heather came to him. She was the one who told him about Tiffany's behavior when he was away on a business trip. When he came home, the table was set. Tiffany was beautiful and cheerful, and she hurried to hug him. He looked at her and asked, "What are you celebrating?" "Michael, what's wrong with you? Pack up and leave." Tiffany's face fell as she realized he knew something. She tried to explain, but Michael wouldn't listen. "Just go," he said, turning away, and she left, taking with her the love and trust they once shared. As Michael sat with Margaret, he felt a wave of regret wash over him. He hadn't given Tiffany a chance to explain, and now he wondered if he had been wrong. Margaret patted his hand gently. "Sometimes, Michael, we need to look back to understand where we went wrong. But remember, it's never too late to make things right." Michael nodded. deep in thought. The past couldn't be changed, but perhaps he could learn from it and make better choices in the future. I don't want a woman like you in my house. Michael, what are you talking about? What am I talking about? I've been told everything about you, absolutely everything. And you believed it right away without even asking me anything. I don't have to ask you anything. Tiffany silently packed up and left. 3 days later, Michael realized he hadn't even let her say a word. Even the most dangerous criminal has a right to have the last word, but Tiffany had already gone. Out of anger, Michael began an affair with Heather, the very person who had told him about Tiffany's supposed behavior. Heather had liked him for a long time and didn't try to hide it. However, this romance did not last long. He decided to leave town because everything reminded him of Tiffany and his lost happiness. Heather yelled and cried, begging him to take her with him, but Michael had never loved her and wasn't going to continue the affair. The next day, Michael returned from work and noticed Margaret sitting on the bench with the other old ladies. He decided to say hello to them all before heading home. Michael, is that you? Hello, he heard a familiar voice and turned around. Heather was standing in front of him. Heather, hello? How are you doing? I'm fine. I'm married and have a child. And how are you doing? I'm fine, but I don't have a family or a child. You didn't marry Tiffany. Michael looked at her in surprise. How could I marry her? She cheated on me. You're the one who told me about it. Michael, you're such a fool. I've always liked you, so I made up this lie about Tiffany. I didn't think you'd believe it. Heather walked away, and Michael looked after her, his mouth open. So Tiffany hadn't cheated on him, and he had chased her away without even listening. He turned around in confusion. Margaret had already approached him and was looking at him intently. So that's why you and Tiffany broke up. Michael, you're such a fool. He realized that he was indeed an idiot, but there was nothing he could do about it now. There was no going back. He noticed that Margaret was looking somewhere. Following her gaze, he saw a boy about 7 years old waving his hands and crying. It was all completely silent. People couldn't hear him, so no one paid any attention to him. The boy saw someone looking at him and waved his hands even harder, pointing to an open hatch. Michael asked Margaret, "What is that boy doing?" "I don't even know. It's Richard. He's mute." "Mute? That makes sense why he's waving his hands silently," Michael said, rushing over to the boy. "Hey, what happened?" The boy pointed to the open hatch, tears rolling down his cheeks. Michael turned on the flashlight on his phone and bent over the hatch. The old ladies from the bench were already rushing toward them. Down there, a little dog was shaking with fear and cold. It wasn't barking, just shivering and squealing. The pit was about 2 feet deep, maybe a little more. Michael looked into the boy's eyes. "Is that your dog?" The boy nodded and cried even harder. Michael smiled. "Don't cry, you're a man. We'll get your dog now." He took off his jacket and handed it to Margaret. He checked his pants pockets to make sure they were empty and that he couldn't lose anything, then put his feet down into the pit. It turned out that about 1 meter deep, there was a metal brace which made rescuing the dog much easier. Michael got covered in black, sticky mud as he picked up the shivering dog. He put the dog under his shirt to keep his hands free. A few minutes later, Michael climbed out of the pit, and everyone was looking at him like he was a hero. He pulled the dog out from under his shirt and handed it to the boy. The boy immediately hugged the dog, tears of joy in his eyes. The dog licked the boy's face happily, and he started crying again. This boy reminded Michael of someone, but it didn't matter. The boy was probably the son of one of Michael's childhood friends. He snuggled up to Michael, holding the dog with one hand and hugging Michael with the other. He couldn't thank him with words, so that's how he expressed his gratitude. When he left, Michael stared after him. Finally, he turned to Margaret. "I'm sorry I got so dirty. Will you let me into the apartment?" Margaret laughed. "Let's go home, hero. I may be old, but I have a modern washing machine." They headed toward the building, and for the first time since he arrived, Michael's mood was just fine. At home, Michael did the laundry himself. Margaret had the latest model washing machine. Then they had dinner. No matter how hard Michael tried, he couldn't get that boy out of his head. "Margaret, is this boy from around here?" Michael asked. Margaret looked at him strangely and then said, "Yes, he's local, from next door." His mother is always at work, so she gave him a friend in the form of a dog. He won't part with that dog. The other kids don't play with them, they only mock him and make fun of him, so this dog is his only friend. But why is his mother always at work? Doesn't she have a husband? She doesn't have a husband, and Richard's a good boy. He's smart, but mute. Has he always been like that? I don't know exactly, but they say not. They lived somewhere else before, not here. Something happened there, some kind of trouble, and he stopped talking after that. His mother took him to all kinds of doctors and got many loans. But the treatment isn't working. That's why this girl has to work 3 jobs, and this boy is only alone for half a day. Then their neighbor picks him up. Michael didn't know who the boy's mother was, but he felt that somehow the boy was stuck in his heart. He wanted to do something for him. He focused his thoughts on the boy and didn't notice that the old woman was looking at him intently. Then she grinned. Michael, you look worried about something. I'm just thinking. I have a friend who has a private children's clinic in the capital. They have excellent doctors there. People even come from other countries for consultations. We should take Richard there. You need a lot of money for that. I told you, his mother works very hard to pay all the bills. Michael said nothing more. He didn't know what was going on in his head, but after dinner, he called his friend. Tell me, is there any chance to help a boy about 7 years old who used to talk, and then something happened? Well, anyway, now he's mute. It's a typical case. It's hard to treat, but there's still a chance. Why do you ask? Is it someone you know? Well, yeah, it's the son of my friends. Well, if it's your friend's son, come here any day. I'll make a 50% discount. Thanks, friend. We'll discuss it together, and I'll call you. Okay, but don't wait too long. The longer the boy doesn't talk, the less chance he has. Michael hung up the phone and thought about it. He knew he needed to help Richard, but he also understood the financial strain it could put on the boy's mother. Determined, he decided he would find a way to make it work, no matter what it took. The treatment wasn't too expensive for Michael, but for that woman it would be unaffordable. Why did he care so much about them? Michael couldn't answer, especially since he didn't even know Richard's mother. The next day, Michael arrived home from work and immediately saw Richard. It was Sunday, but Richard was alone again, playing with his dog at the far end of the yard, away from the other kids. Margaret was sitting on the bench, and Michael headed toward Richard. The boy noticed him and smiled. Once again, Michael had the feeling that the boy reminded him of someone. He should ask Margaret who his mother is. Maybe then this strange feeling will disappear. Hey, Richard, Michael said, petting the dog. What's your dog's name? Richard immediately took a stick and drew some letters in the sand. Michael read the dog's name and looked at Richard. Is your mom home? Richard shook his head negatively, then took Michael's hand and pointed to the number 8 on the clock. It was 7, which meant that his mother would be home in an hour. Michael said goodbye and headed home. Margaret saw him leaving, and then also went home to make dinner for the man. Over dinner, the old woman asked, I saw that you tried to communicate with Richard. How is he? Why did you go to him? I don't know why. I wanted to help the boy, and I called my friend. He's ready to take him to the clinic right away. But will his mother accept an offer from a stranger? I think I should talk to her. Michael, don't think about it. Just go and talk to her. Helping is such a good thing. People don't help each other much these days. But I'm afraid she'll refuse my help. If only rationality wins out, then she will think of Richard first. Michael nodded, deciding to find Richard's mother the next day and offer his help directly. The thought of the boy's future weighed on him, and he knew he couldn't just walk away without trying to make a difference. It's better to forget about pride when a child needs help. You're right, but you have no idea who his mother is, and you don't know how she'll take it. Well, I'll try to talk to that woman anyway. My friend said that his clinic has helped many children with the same problem. Richard has a chance. Michael stood up and headed for the exit. The old lady whispered, May God help you. As Michael left the apartment, he realized he didn't know where to go and went back inside. Margaret, what apartment do they live in? Apartment number 10. Michael took a step toward the exit and stopped. He froze, his head pounding, his palms sweaty. He turned around. 10. Yes, Michael. Tiffany is Richard's mother. She came back here 3 years ago. Michael walked out of the apartment and stopped in the yard. Tiffany is Richard's mother. What should he do? He knew he certainly couldn't leave Richard without help now, but he also knew that Tiffany just wouldn't listen to him after all he had hurt her so unfairly. Michael approached the next building. He had to try, he had to help. He pressed the bell. The door swung open almost immediately, and Richard's eyes and the dog's eyes looked at him. "Richard, who's there?" Tiffany came out into the hallway. She hadn't changed much. She was just as beautiful and gentle as 8 years ago. She had gained a few pounds, but it only made her more beautiful. What are you doing here?" Richard gestured quickly, and Tiffany said, "So you're the one who saved the dog." "Tiffany, I know you're not happy to see me, but listen to me. I'm here to talk about Richard." Tiffany turned pale. "About Richard? Did Richard do something wrong?" "No, nothing. Don't be frightened. You see, I have a friend in the capital. He has his own children's clinic. They deal with cases like this, and he says he can help Richard." Tiffany sat down on the couch. She wished more than anything else that her son could talk again. It was her fault. A few years ago, when they lived in another city, Tiffany had been driving with Richard sitting next to her. She was distracted and didn't notice a dog jumping under the wheels. When Richard saw it, he just stopped talking. For the boy, the dog's death was a terrible shock. At first, Tiffany thought it was just a shock, and he'd be quiet for a day or two, but almost 4 years had passed, and nothing had changed. She felt guilty for messing up his life. "I heard about this clinic, but it's too expensive. We can't afford it. Tiffany, my friend can offer a significant discount. I want to help. Please let me do this for Richard." Tiffany looked at him, tears welling up in her eyes. She saw the sincerity in Michael's eyes, the determination to make amends. She nodded slowly. "Okay, Michael. If there's a chance for Richard, I can't refuse. Thank you." Michael felt a wave of relief. "We'll make the arrangements as soon as possible. Richard deserves this chance." Tiffany hugged Richard tightly, tears streaming down her face. For the first time in years, hope began to flicker in her heart. Michael knew this was just the beginning, but he was determined to see it through, not just for Richard but for the redemption he sought. "Tiffany, let me help you, please. If you let me, I'll pay for his treatment." 3 days later, Michael was leaving and taking Tiffany and Richard with him. They decided to take the dog with them. "Let the dog stay with me for a while. I hope he doesn't have time to eat all the furniture," Margaret joked. Richard laughed, and even Tiffany smiled. It all happened very quickly and unexpectedly. Michael had shown up out of the blue, offering to go to the clinic. They had already sent all of Richard's tests and medical records to his friend by email. Michael parked outside the clinic. They got out of the car and headed for the entrance. Tiffany was very nervous, but Richard was looking around with curiosity. There was a huge children's playground in the clinic courtyard. Little patients went out there to play, and Richard couldn't take his eyes off such a miracle. Michael knocked on the office door and came in. He and his friend embraced, and then he invited everyone to sit down. He examined Richard's medical record and asked Tiffany questions. She answered. Then he looked at Richard. "Well, let's not waste time talking. We'll do the treatment first, and then we'll talk." Richard smiled and nodded. Tiffany asked if she could stay with her son. "Sure, Michael ordered a private room for your son. You can stay with him as long as you like." He called, and a second later, a nurse showed up in the office. "Show them room number 5, please." When Tiffany and Richard left, Michael's friend looked at him and said, "Why did you hide the fact that you have a son for so long?" "A son? What son? What are you talking about? Are you serious? Isn't Richard your son? That's strange. He's an exact copy of you." And then Michael realized. He realized who Richard reminded him of. He reminded him of himself. Michael looked at the boy and saw himself as a child. He stood up, then sat down. "Richard." "Looks like me," Michael said, more to himself than to his friend. "Yes, it's uncanny," his friend replied. "You sure he's not yours?" Michael shook his head, trying to process this new revelation. He knew he had to talk to Tiffany about it, but not now. First, they needed to focus on Richard's treatment. Later that evening, after the initial treatments, Michael found Tiffany sitting in the clinic's garden, watching Richard play on the playground. "Tiffany," he began, There's something we need to talk about. She looked up at him, her expression cautious. Richard. He looks like me, Michael said softly. Is there something you're not telling me? Tiffany sighed, tears welling up in her eyes. I didn't know how to tell you, Michael. Yes, Richard is your son. I found out I was pregnant after we broke up. I wanted to tell you, but I didn't know how, and then I heard you had left town. I thought it was better this way. Michael sat down beside her, overwhelmed by the revelation. I wish I had known. I would have been there for you, for him. I know, Tiffany said, wiping her tears. But now you know. And now we can focus on giving Richard the best chance. Michael nodded, determined. We'll do whatever it takes. For Richard. Michael, am I getting this right? Is he really your son and you just didn't know about it? Geez, what an idiot I am, Michael muttered. He immediately remembered that Tiffany had made a special dinner that day. Apparently she wanted to tell him the news, and this is what he did to her. Tiffany would never forgive him. What should I do? Michael was confused. Well, you have to make your own decision. How did it happen that you didn't know anything? I chased her away that day. Her friend lied to me, and I believed her. Yeah, it's a tough situation. Well, you have about a month to fix everything while they're here. At least try to make things right. Margaret was bored on the bench. Then suddenly she saw Michael's car. She got up and hurried toward it. Richard jumped out of the car. He had grown a lot, even though they'd only been away for 2 months. Richard ran to the old lady and said hello. The old lady started crying. Oh, Richard, so they helped you. Michael was walking toward her with Tiffany next to him. Margaret looked at Tiffany's face and immediately realized everything. They had made up. The woman was glowing with joy, her eyes sparkling though she tried to hide it. Michael hugged the old lady like she was someone very close to him. Margaret, we're here to invite you to the wedding. If you hadn't offered to let me stay at your place, I probably wouldn't have met Tiffany and Richard. The old woman cried, I'm too old to go to wedding parties. What kind of guest am I? You are the most honored guest, Margaret. You knew from the beginning that Richard was my son, didn't you? It was strange that you didn't realize it right away. He looks so much like you. Yeah, I kept wondering who he reminded me of. Margaret, I'll send a driver for you in 2 weeks. I won't take no for an answer. The wedding was in full swing. Michael decided to throw a big party. There were so many guests that they were tired of listening to congratulations. In the heat of the party, Tiffany turned pale and walked out of the hall. They were just standing near Margaret. Michael looked at the old lady in confusion. Margaret was silent, but her eyes could tell a lot. What's wrong with her, Michael wondered, turning to the old lady. Margaret smiled. Well, at least Daddy will be there when the second baby is born. Michael stared at the old woman in astonishment, then smiled strangely and rushed after his wife. Now he wouldn't take a step away from her. He would be with her every second, every minute. He wouldn't miss a thing. It wouldn't be like the first time.